the Prime Minister of Canada.
This morning, I want to begin by talking about the request for assistance we received from Quebec on Wednesday and give you the most recent news about medical equipment supplies. The Minister of Public Health has been working with Quebec and the Minister of National Defence, and I can now confirm that approximately 125 members of the Canadian Armed Forces with healthcare training will be providing support to workers in long-term care facilities. We continue to work with the Government of Quebec to find other ways to support them, including with the Red Cross and specialized volunteers registered with Health Canada. As regards the supplies of medical equipment, Bell Canada has donated 1.5 million N95 masks, and we are working as quickly as possible to get them to our frontline workers. That can be added to the millions of surgical masks that we sent out to the provinces and territories this week.
Over the past few weeks, the pandemic has created anxiety and uncertainty for all Canadians, but some are going through an especially tough time. COVID-19 has brought many industries to a halt, and workers across the country are struggling as a result. From the start, our goal as a government has been clear: to help all Canadians get through these challenging times. As I've said many times before, we're here to support you, to lend you a helping hand when you need it most. Across the country, Canadians are standing shoulder to shoulder, and we're all in this together. Today, our government is announcing more help for workers in Alberta, Saskatchewan, BC, and Newfoundland and Labrador. We're also announcing more help for small businesses and more help for those who work in the arts, culture, and sports sectors. I'll start with the energy sector. Right now, workers and families are struggling because of things beyond their control. Both the devastating effects of the pandemic and the price war driven by foreign interests are a challenge. As a result, companies have had to slow down or pause their operations, leaving too many people out of work. To help these workers, our government will invest $1.7 billion to clean up orphan and inactive wells in Alberta, Saskatchewan, and BC. These wells, which are no longer in use, can be detrimental not only to our environment, but to people's health. Think of the farmer who can't grow anything on his land because of an abandoned well a few steps away from his home. Think of the small town or Indigenous community struggling with this issue that has been festering for years or even decades. Cleaning them up will bring people back to work and help many landowners who've had these wells on their property for years but haven't been able to get them taken care of and the land restored. Our goal is to create immediate jobs in these provinces while helping companies avoid bankruptcy and supporting our environmental targets. In Alberta alone, these investments will maintain 5,200 jobs. We've listened to the concerns of landowners, municipalities, and Indigenous communities who want to make sure that the polluter pay principle is strengthened and that their voices are heard. I want to thank the Government of Alberta for working with us and listening to their concerns. Our government will also establish a $750 million emission reduction fund with a focus on methane to create and maintain jobs through pollution reduction efforts. This includes $75 million to help the offshore industry cut emissions in Newfoundland and Labrador. This fund will primarily provide repayable contributions to firms to make them more competitive, reduce waste and pollution, and most importantly, protect jobs. Right now, many energy firms are experiencing a cash crunch, so they don't have the funds to invest in technologies to reduce emissions or fix methane leaks. Today's announcement will allow for this kind of work to be done and create jobs people need during this difficult time. Through the wells and methane initiatives, we estimate that we will maintain roughly 10,000 jobs across the country. Just because we're in a health crisis doesn't mean we can neglect the environmental crisis. We're also working with BDC and EDC to expand credit support for at-risk medium-sized energy companies so they can maintain operations and keep their employees.
Our government will be investing $1.7 billion to clean up orphan and abandoned wells in Alberta, Saskatchewan, and British Columbia. The goal is to create jobs for workers in the energy sector, avoid companies going bankrupt, and support our environmental targets. These wells, which are no longer used to produce oil, may present a risk not only for our environment but also for our health. By cleaning them up, we will create jobs for workers. We will also help people who have these abandoned wells on their land and cannot get rid of them. We are predicting that these funds will maintain almost 5,200 jobs in Alberta alone. We developed this policy with the government of Alberta and municipal partners, and I want to thank them for their contributions. Our government will also be setting up a $750 million fund to reduce emissions that will focus on pollution caused by methane in order to create and maintain jobs. Of that sum, $75 million will be allocated to oil and gas companies who work offshore Newfoundland and Labrador to reduce their emissions. This fund will provide for repayable contributions to companies in order to protect jobs, increase their competitiveness, and reduce pollution. Right now, energy sector companies have cash flow problems, which means that they don't have the necessary money to invest in technologies that help to reduce emissions or repair methane leaks. Today's announcement will allow these companies to carry out that work while at the same time creating jobs for workers during this difficult time. This public health crisis must not prevent us from taking action to fight the climate crisis. And with this initiative to clean up the wells and the fund to reduce emissions, we believe that 10,000 jobs will be maintained. At the same time, we are working with BDC and EDC to strengthen credit support for medium-sized energy companies that are particularly at risk. Once again, the goal is to allow these companies to continue their activity in order to keep their employees.
Now I want to turn to what we're going to do next for small businesses and the people they employ. Over the past few weeks, we've taken a number of steps to support these employers and mostly their employees. We introduced the Canada Emergency Wage Subsidy to help keep people on the payroll. We launched and expanded the Canada Emergency Business Account for those businesses struggling with cash flow. But Ministers Joly, Ng, Baines, and others have heard that some businesses are still falling through the cracks. To fix that, our government will provide $962 million to regional development agencies and the Community Futures Network. This funding will help ensure that more businesses, especially smaller employees based in more rural parts of the country, or those who don't have a relationship with a traditional financial institution, are getting the support that they need. We're also going to give $270 million to Futurepreneur and the Industrial Research Assistance Program to support innovators and other early-stage development firms that don't qualify for the wage subsidy but still need help.
Now, for small businesses, today we are announcing two further investments. First, our government will provide $962 million to regional development agencies and to the Community Futures Network. This is money that will make it possible to provide help to small businesses that don't qualify for the emergency wage subsidy or to receive a loan through the emergency account. Our government will also allocate $270 million to Futurepreneur and to the Industrial Research Assistance Program to support innovators and other startups that are not eligible for the wage subsidy. We also have news for people working in the arts, culture and sports sectors. These are industries which, somewhat like the small businesses I just described, are not able to receive the assistance already announced because their income structures are not the same or they don't operate the same way. From the beginning of this crisis, artists have been providing us with comfort, laughter, and happiness. Now our athletes continue to inspire us, encourage us, and make us proud. People who work in the arts, culture, and sports sectors share their passion with us and allow us to dream. And these days, when we're all at home and isolated, they make us feel a little bit less alone. These are only some of the reasons why we have to be there for them, as they are there for us. Therefore, our government will provide $500 million to Heritage Canada to support our artists, creators, and the rising stars of our sporting associations. Through this funding, people will be able to receive wage support, and organizations will have access to funding if they are experiencing liquidity problems.
We'll give $500 million to Heritage Canada to support those who work in the arts, culture, and sports sectors. Like the small businesses I was talking about, people and businesses in these sectors do not have access to some of the help we've announced because of how the companies operate or how revenues are generated. With this investment, people will be able to receive wage support, and organizations that are struggling with cash flow will be able to access financing. At the same time, we continue to support those who've lost their jobs with the Canada Emergency Response Benefit. So far, over 7.5 million payments have been made. That's money sent directly to those who need it most. I want to again thank our amazing public servants who are processing these claims at record speeds. Moving forward, we will be releasing the latest figures on the CERB through the government's open data portal 3 times a week, so academics, researchers, and Canadians can keep track of the work being done. We will continue to provide and open up data so that we can get the best advice from experts and continue to help Canadians. I want to end this morning by reminding everyone that today is the 38th anniversary of the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, which underpins who we are as a country and who we strive to be as a people. It protects the right of each and every one of us to be who we are, to worship how we want, to love whom we love. At the heart of the Charter is the notion of choice, that we can choose the kind of life we want for ourselves. As our country confronts this pandemic, I'm especially grateful that Canadians have chosen to protect each other and care for one another. To everyone who has stayed home and followed public health recommendations, thank you. Making that choice together today will ensure that we remain who we are as Canadians for generations to come. Merci beaucoup tout le monde. Je suis maintenant content de prendre mes questions.
I'm now ready to take your
Merci
questions.
beaucoup, Monsieur le Premier ministre. On va commencer la période de questions par le téléphone. Opérateur, c'est à vous.
Merci. Thank you. The first question, Dylan Robertson, Winnipeg Free Press, line open.
Prime Minister, you've expressed a preference for virtual parliament. Many regions of Canada have terrible internet connections, and they tend to be the ones that feel the most ignored by Ottawa. Are you comfortable with having virtual sittings if MPs can't participate in real time from their homes?
Obviously, the point of virtual sittings would be to ensure that Canadians who are not within driving distance of Ottawa continue to have their views represented and their concerns heard. That is a technological challenge that we will work very, very hard on to ensure that as we move forward on virtual parliament solutions, as the Speaker and the House of Commons work on that, that we make sure that every voice can be heard of the 338 Canadians. At the same time, we have proposed to the opposition parties that Parliament could come back every single week to discuss legislation and to ensure that there is accountability. We need to make sure that our democracy continues to function, and this is something that we are very serious about. We recognize right now, on the books, there is a rule that says that 338 MPs need to get on flights Friday or Sunday evening to come back to Ottawa on Monday morning as Parliament is supposed to resume. That is obviously not a good idea. We are not in normal circumstances, so we're negotiating with all opposition parties to try and make sure we can find a way to keep the important work of our democracy going while at the same time respecting public health advice. Okay.
First of all, in terms of a virtual parliament, I think it will be important to ensure that members of parliament from every corner of this country can share their preoccupations and those of their constituents. And that's why we're working with the House of Commons to ensure that we have the technology to do that. At the same time, we know that it's important for our democracy to continue to work, and therefore we have proposed that Parliament resume its work every week to pass legislation and ensure that there is accountability and that questions can be asked of the government. We do hope that the opposition parties will agree to that proposal, because otherwise Parliament is supposed to sit with 338 members of Parliament starting on Monday morning, and I think we all realize that that would not be a good idea.
And Prime Minister, the Manitoba Premier has asked for an emergency credit agency to access better interest rates. Governor Polo says that your government did not ask the Bank of Canada to help with the provincial debt market. He said no one has asked us to do anything on the provincial front. The Premier has also asked to put public servants on EI. Today's job announcement doesn't hit the provincial debt markets. So my question is, when will the provinces learn what you're doing for their debts and what is already off the table?
I had an excellent conversation last night with the premiers of all the provinces and territories. This issue was brought up, and I assured them that Finance Canada is looking at it. We recognize that different provinces carry different debt loads and different challenges on access to credit. The Bank of Canada has taken significant measures that have had a positive impact on provincial coffers. At the same time, we will continue to make sure that provinces across the country are able to give the support they need to give to their citizens.
Thank you. Next question, moderator.
Thank you. Merci. Next question, Althea Raj, Huffington Post. Line open.
Good morning, Prime Minister. You've announced a number of measures today and also earlier this week changes to help those with some income apply for the CRB. You've lowered the threshold for some business owners to apply for interest-free loans. But still, a number of people I've spoken with this week are not impacted by any of these changes. What should people in these positions, people who are left out and who have a hard time making ends meet, do? Should they apply for the CRB or should they wait for your government to come up with another fix?
From the very beginning, we knew we had to help as many people as we possibly could who needed the help as quickly as possible. And that's why we moved forward with two very big, very strong programs, both the Canada Emergency Response Benefit that has sent out over 7.5 million payments already, and the wage subsidy, which will kick in a few weeks, which is allowing employers to rehire their employees so that when the economy bounces back, people will still have those links to their jobs while they are supported in this time of difficulty. But from the beginning, we recognized that moving quickly and broadly would leave gaps. And that's why over the past weeks, we have been announcing almost every single day new measures that tweak the proposals we've made, that expand other proposals, that create new initiatives to try and make sure we're getting help to everyone who needs them. The announcements we've made today around help for the arts and cultural sectors, for sporting organizations, for small businesses like startups, for small businesses in rural areas, for the range of workers in the energy sector who are facing layers of calamity right now, are the kinds of things that we're making sure that everyone is getting the help we need. We are continuing to listen to Canadians who are expressing that they are not getting the help they need, and we are constantly looking for ways to help them.
Follow-up question?
Yeah, thank you. So are you basically saying wait until the government comes up with another fix? Because, as you know, on Saturday, MPs voted to support a motion that basically said that if you need help, the government is going to ensure that if you applied for CERB and you weren't supposed to be eligible, that you would be unjustly penalized. So is the government saying that the worst thing that will happen to you if you apply for CERB but don't actually qualify, that you will have to pay the money back in full next year? Is that the worst thing that will happen to people who apply for CERB because they feel they need it?
We expect people to apply for the programs for which they qualify, and we are therefore working to make sure we're expanding the qualifications so that people who need the help will get them. We will continue to announce measures that will include more and more people, help more and more people as we move forward, because for all the millions of people and companies and businesses and employers that we're helping across this country, we know there is more to do, and that's what we're continually announcing almost every day, new measures to fix support for people in particular situations.
We recognize that the programs that we created very quickly to help as many people as possible are not enough because some people have special circumstances. So for a number of weeks now, almost on a daily basis, we have been announcing changes or extensions of the programs to allow people to receive more help based on the programs we put in place.
Thank you. Merci. Prochaine question, Marie Vastel, Le Devoir. À vous.
Good morning, Mr. Trudeau. I'd like to come back to your aid plan that you have just unveiled. A lot of people were expecting you to do more. Some people were suggesting that there needed to be an equity contribution from the government. Are you prepared to do that? And if not, why not? Why did you not choose that avenue? Our emphasis right from the outset was to help Canadians in difficulty, to help families that are suffering, to help people who need help. And that's why the wage subsidy and the Canada Emergency Response Benefit are there to assist millions of Canadians in industries right across the country. And we clearly saw that the oil industry has special issues because of what is happening on international markets with the oil price decline, and also because of COVID-19. So all of these issues mean that we have to do a bit more, and that's exactly what we're doing now. We will continue to look at other possibilities if there's a need, but we primarily want to ensure that we're helping Canadian families and Canadian workers who need help during these difficult times.
We took as an approach from the very beginning that we need to help Canadians. We need to help workers and families who are hit by this COVID-19 slowdown and shutdown. That's why we move forward with the Canada Emergency Response Benefit that has helped millions upon millions of Canadians, and the wage subsidy, which has allowed companies to rehire workers and will ensure that families across the country get much more support. And that is across all industries, across the country. However, we recognize that certain industries are facing even more difficult times. The oil and gas sector, because of the global price war, because of the lowered demand related to COVID, and because of the measures brought in to counter COVID itself, those families are particularly hard hit. And that's where this initiative, which will create or preserve 5,200 jobs in Alberta, and the other initiatives, which will lead to perhaps 10,000 jobs across the energy sector, are the kinds of things that we can do right now. Of course, we will continue to work with partners and concerned sectors across the country as we move forward to see if there's a need to do more.
En suivi, Marie.
Follow-up?
Oui.
Yes. Some people were concerned that your assisted would be influenced by some members of your cabinet, the views of some members of their cabinet. Today you're providing support to clean up orphan walls and to reduce emissions. So what do you say to those people who will be disappointed by the extent of the assistance that's available, and also other people who said that you may have been tainted by the views of other members of your cabinet? I can tell you that personal convictions of cabinet members have always been that we need to help Canadians who need help and to fight the COVID-19 crisis. It's to ensure that we can get through this and we continue to be an extraordinary country in the years to come. That is our priority, and that is why the help that we've been giving workers with two main measures, the emergency response benefit and the wage subsidy, are available to everyone. But at the same time, we're doing other things that the government of Alberta has been asking us to do for some time, which is to clean up orphan wells so that the companies that now are reducing or are required to reduce their emissions are able to do that, particularly when it comes to methane. So that is the choice we have been making to help Canadians, and we hope that all Canadians will have a better employment as a result.
Modérateur?
Thank you. Merci. Prochaine question, Mélanie Marquis, La Presse. À vous.
Merci. Bonjour, Monsieur Trudeau.
Good morning, Mr. Trudeau. With respect to the deployment of Canadian Armed Forces members, can you tell us where those military members are coming from? And why such a limited number of reinforcements for Quebec? Because, as we know, these facilities are in a dire situation. Well, we have been working with Quebec, and we were speaking to Quebec yesterday to see exactly how we could support them. We're talking about 125 military members who will be providing significant support to these institutions in Quebec. But we also know we can do more with the Red Cross and the Bank of Volunteers that we have. Quebec also has a Bank of Volunteers it can access. So we will continue to seek ways to provide that help as best we can, and we always will want to do more. But the situation with the CAF members is that we are always limited in our medical resources within any organization, including in the armed forces. Do you have a follow-up? Yes. Just to get a clarification, I realize that medical employees are limited in number, but there is information circulating, Mr. Trudeau, that an agreement has been reached with the U.S. on the closure of the border. Could you comment on that? Well, as I've said before, we are in constant conversations with the United States, which is our ally and our friend, to ensure that we can both protect our citizens. And my priority will always be to protect Canadians, and we continue to work with the Americans to ensure that the borders remain secure. As I've often said, I do not expect those borders to be reopened in a short period of time. We will continue to listen to science and to closely monitor the evolution of this virus in Canada and around the world before we make any decision on that. But I can tell you that our discussions with the Americans continue, and they're very positive.
As I've said many times, conversations are constant and ongoing with the American administration on issues of mutual concern, including the border. As I've said, We do not feel that reopening the border anytime soon is likely. My responsibility is to ensure the protection and safety of Canadians. That is what we will continue to do, and the conversations with the Americans have been extremely aligned and extremely productive.
Glenn McGregor, CTV News. Prime Minister, for weeks now, you have been promising relief and aid for the energy sector. What you've announced today is going to help a comparatively small number of workers. It isn't going to do anything for the sector overall to help deal with devastating impact of this virus and the downturn in the world oil markets. My question is this it? Is this the package you were promising? And if so, what do you say to people in Western Canada, particularly, who are expecting more substantial relief?
The first things we did was move forward with the Canada Emergency Response Benefit that's putting money in the pockets of more than 7 million Canadians, including many people in the oil and gas sector who've lost their paychecks because of this COVID-19 crisis. On top of that, the wage subsidy allows Canadian workers to continue to receive their salaries, to continue to stay connected to their work in the oil and gas sector, which are significant helps for a major industry across this country. On top of that, we've been working with the government of Alberta and with industry to look at other things that can be necessary. We heard very clearly that the methane regulations that we are bringing in will be a challenge for industries to meet, and industry and others asked that we therefore back off on the methane regulations. We decided instead to lend them money to help them keep people working to upgrade and update their measures so we can continue to fight climate change and reduce emissions while keeping people at work. We've also heard very clearly, and not just from industry, but from municipalities, particularly rural municipalities, landowners across Alberta, that the issue of persistent orphan or inactive wells is a real challenge. And this is an opportunity for us to make sure that Albertans are getting to work in cleaning up their province, at the same time as we've gotten commitments by the government of Alberta to strengthen the regulations so we see fewer orphan and inactive wells in the future. We've also made credit available for medium-sized oil and gas companies who are facing particular challenges in terms of liquidity right now. We will continue to look at ways we can support important industries in this country, including the oil and gas sector. We look forward to doing that while at the same time keeping our focus squarely on the families and workers who need our help.
Prime Minister Julie Van Dusen, CBC News. You spoke to the premiers last night, so I'm hoping you can update us on this. Blaine Higgs, as an example, has said he's hoping to get his economy going by the summer. John Horgan this morning on CBC said that he and his Washington state counterpart could decide when the border opens. So I'm wondering, who decides all this? Is it you? Is it them? And if it is you, will there be national standards to guide them?
We talked last night about how important it is to be coordinated and agreed on the principles and the approaches that we take, while at the same time recognizing that the situation in PEI is very different from the situation in Ontario, very different from the situation in BC. There will be regional approaches, as there have been all along, to the next steps, but we all agreed that we need to continue to remain very, very vigilant as we carefully look at reopening the economy, about relaunching certain sectors in the future. We will continue our coordination around the principles and the steps that need to be taken. But of course, this is Canada, which means that there are very different needs and very different approaches that will be in place across the country. What we will be working on to coordinate and collaborate on is ensuring that the messages that get out and that the lens that we take and the data that we collect and the way we do this is aligned and coordinated so that we can maximize our chances of getting through this without having to fall back into self-isolation the way we have been these past few weeks.
One of the principles we agreed on with the premiers is the importance of coordinating and working together to ensure that any steps that we take with respect to reopening the economy or relaxing the current rules with respect to self-isolation and physical distancing are done in proper coordination. Now, obviously, certain provinces and regions will have their own reality, and we respect that, of course. But if we can ensure that there is proper coordination so that Canadians understand that the same principles are being applied across the board, that data is being collected in the same way, and that we're analyzing the reality vigilantly and consistently and in a similar manner, then that will maximize our chance of getting through this crisis without finding ourselves in more self-isolation and economic slowdown.
Prime Minister, Canada's largest oil and gas lobby group says the federal government should consider suspending dozens of environmental regulations, laws, and policies due to the economic and health crisis triggered by COVID-19. Critics call it a crass attempt to exploit the pandemic. How do you respond to the letter, and are some of the 30 requests still being considered by the government?
Just because we are in one crisis right now doesn't mean we can forget about the other crisis, the climate crisis that we are also facing as a world, as a country. But we recognize that, for example, moving ahead with the methane regulations is something very difficult for companies right now in the oil and gas sector who are strained because of the multiple challenges they're facing both on the global stage and on the lower demand. That's why we're making investments in supporting those companies directly so that they can meet those methane reduction targets with funds that we're giving them so that we can stay on track to protect future generations and to reduce emissions from our industry. This is something that Canadians understand, that we need to continue to move forward, but we need to help people in different ways as we move forward. That will be the lens that we take.
And on a separate matter, China has revised its numbers on the Wuhan deaths, increasing them by 50%. Do you think this is a statistical verification, as China claims, or proof they covered it up?
I think we all need to be very attentive to how data flows around the world and be very thoughtful about how we process different information and how we apply the lessons learned from elsewhere around the world to what we do. We will continue to work with partners and allies and international institutions and organizations as we figure out how to get through today and tomorrow. But there will be many questions to ask once we are through this on how various countries behaved and what sort of principles we need to learn from and conclusions we need to draw as we move forward. Je pense que nous avons besoin.
I think we need to look very carefully at the numbers being shared by countries around the world, and certainly there will be certain conclusions to draw from them regarding the behavior of some of these countries. But for the time being, we must work together, we must cooperate and do everything we can to learn from each other and better protect our own citizens.
Globe and Mail. Prime Minister, other world leaders have raised serious questions about China's handling of this pandemic and whether it holds responsibility for not containing it within its borders. It's not just the White House, it's also leaders in France and the United Kingdom. Here at home, your government has taken the opposite approach, with one former Canadian ambassador calling Ottawa's approach almost humiliating. In your answer just now, you didn't even mention China by name. So why is your government so reluctant to acknowledge China's possible faults in this pandemic?
My job right now is to make sure that Canadians get the best support, the best protection, and are able to get through this as best we possibly can. That means getting the equipment that we need. That means ensuring that the cooperation and the collaboration on the international stage is done properly. That means focusing right now on today and tomorrow and how we're going to keep Canadians safe. There will be plenty of time to point fingers, to ask questions, to draw conclusions, and to ensure that there are consequences for things that different countries may have done during this pandemic. Right now, my job is to look out for Canadians. Okay. My responsibility
as Prime Minister is to ensure the health and safety of all Canadians. And that's exactly what I'm doing now, and that's what I intend to continue to do. We will continue to work with different countries and international institutions to ensure that we're doing everything that's necessary to get through this. And after that, there's no doubt that there will be questions raised and further reflection. There may even be consequences for some countries, depending on how they behaved during this global crisis. But for the time being, I have to remain focused on what is important for Canadians.
So are you suggesting, I guess, that, China might withhold PPE or something? Is that why you're not mentioning China, as you still continue to do? And on Julie's question about the way out of this, what level of testing do we need to see across Canada in order to start reopening the economy?
We've looked at the need for many more tests. So we see that testing has been a key part of controlling the spread, not just knowing who has developed COVID and can pass it on, but actually being able to control the spread through contact tracing, through isolation and quarantine measures. Testing is a key part of it. We need to continue to ramp up our testing capacities. We need to do a better job of coordinating on testing methodology and approaches across the provinces so that we can have a better vision of what is exactly happening. But testing certainly needs to increase as we move forward. Fortunately, it is increasing as we move forward.
Bonjour, Monsieur Trudeau, Philippe Vincent, Président Radio-Canada.
Radio-Canada. About the 125 medical personnel from the CAF, how many physicians, how many nurses are in that number? Are we taking people away from civilian hospitals to do that? And when exactly will they be able to go into these long-term care facilities? We will be sharing that information with you in the coming hours, but I can tell you that as early as this afternoon, there will be members of the armed forces that will be on the ground to assess the kind of approach that is needed and what their posture will be. And in the coming days, many of those 125 personnel will be arriving on the ground in Quebec. And with respect to the $500 million for artists, who will be getting it? Why isn't it the association receiving it? Well, I want to say that Minister Guilbeault and other ministers will be at a press conference very soon to answer those questions as to how we're going to be helping our artists. We know that this is a situation where many artists are in real difficulty, and we need our artists. We need them to continue to make us dream, particularly in dark times. That's why we're going to be there to help them.
Merci tout le monde.
Thank you, everyone.
Okay, that is the